Hey there. I'd like to talk a little bit about how to sharpen your ice axes and your crampons. I don't think a lot of people quite understand how to do that, and it should be obvious that the sharper you keep these things, the easier they are to stick and kick into the ice. So keeping them sharp is not a bad idea. It's not too hard to do. You can do this at home with pretty minimal equipment. And there's definitely some things that you can do to make it easier, and some things you can do that will make it not so good. First of all, what you can obviously need is the crampons and axes you want to sharpen, but you're going to need a nice flat file. And a coarse file is nice. It will, something with wider spaces between the ridges is going to take off more material than a real fine file. But most of these larger hand files like this are going to be like that. They're going to have probably one side that's more coarse than the other. And generally speaking, I just use the coarse side because I'm just trying to take some material off, get it pretty sharp. We're not trying to make razor blades, but we do want to have pretty sharp implements. My ice pick here is still pretty sharp from the last time I climbed. That's several times. It didn't get very dull, so there's not a whole lot of sharpening needed. But obviously, occasionally you're going to hit rocks, and even just after general use, they'll start to get dull on the tip there. And what you want to try to do is reproduce the angles on the pick when it was brand new. So there's going to be an angle on this side and an angle on that side. In addition, occasionally when you hit a rock, hit that doink on the tip, it's going to bend over a little bit more, make almost like a hooked beak feature. And there's a little bit of that on this one right now. And in that case, I'm actually going to file the bottom slightly to bring that flatness down at the bottom. There's other things you can do to modify picks and file teeth off, and different strategies like that for different types of climbing, particularly mixed climbing or a variety of dry tooling applications. I'm not going to go over special modifications, just strictly how to sharpen the axes so they'll get into the ice a little easier. So again, I want to try to use my file to bring that edge back as sharp as I can from how it was, close to how it was. And so I usually just hold the axe in my knees, and I start filing down along that side at the angle that it should be at, trying to keep the file parallel to the edge that was originally set on there, not getting on any radically different angle this way or that way, but like so that the edge that's striking the ice is generally going to be a straight, sharp point. And I take several passes in one direction on one side, and I'll do it on the other side. You can turn it over if you want to keep going that way, or you can keep it in the same direction you had been with the other side, but you're just going to have to turn it over this way. So either method works in this regard. I can do it like that, or I can do it like that. I find that if I go, in this case, up on one side and down on the other, it does have a slight tendency to, just from the nature of me being offset, for making the front of it slightly off. But if it's sharp, it won't matter too much. Either way, you work it till both sides are nice and sharp again. A few passes on each side so you don't get this over filing on one direction. Check it every once in a while. And you want to avoid going back and forth with this thing, which if you did that, it might feel like you're taking off a lot more material, but you will not do any favors to your file. It won't last as long. So just try to go in one direction. Again, if you have this curled over where the metal has bent over the tip, you can take that flat across the bottom and take that off. That can sometimes help. How sharp? Depends on how sharp you want it. They don't need to be again, razor blades, but I like to bring it back to where there's a sharp edge across the top and the point at the bottom is pretty pointy. It's not doled out, and that might require taking more material off than you'd think to get it that kind of sharp. If you're going to be climbing rock, dry tooling, mixed climbing as well, that sharper point on the bottom will give it a bit more precision and stability on really thin or tenuous type holds. It may not be quite as crucial if you're just climbing ice. The sharper it is, the more it will be prone to doling easily. It's kind of hard to explain. So when you've gotten it as sharp as you want, some folks will actually detune it just a touch by taking the file off the tip of it here and taking just a little bit of the sharpness on it. So it's still sharp, but not so much so that it'll just cut you, and that is likely to, those really thin top ends can bend and deform more easily. So some people will detune that slightly. You can go, as you start filing this thing back, it may start to round a little bit. That's natural and it's not a problem. Plenty of people have them that way. And eventually, if you file this thing enough, you'll start to lose how much distance is to that first tooth. And you can file it back. You can file it back 3 or 4 teeth if you wanted, but most people will find after they've lost that first tooth, it's probably time to replace the pick, though they still work. It's just going to be a shorter pick angle, a little less clearance, and thicker at that end, so it may not penetrate as easily. Nonetheless, you can keep sharpening them quite a ways. On expeditions where I sometimes have had a small file and I've broken a pick, I'll sharpen it back 3 or 4 teeth, and they still work. But I do replace them after it gets down a little ways. So that's the ice axe. With the crampons, quite similar. There's a little bit more involved with the crampons. Come out of my trusty FedEx bag. I like to keep them in. The crampon, the front point of the crampon is pretty much the same as the pick of the axe. You're going to try to bring that front point back towards the shape it was originally. So it should have a flat edge here relative to the kicking surface, and the angles on both sides should be similar to how they were, and nice and sharp here with somewhat of a point here. These things tend to get much more dull than the axe. They're not as dependent on how sharp they are for penetration. The axe is much more so. Nonetheless, dull crampons, they don't feel as secure, and you do want to keep these things in sharp condition too. The other points on the crampon are also important. Maybe a little less so depending on the type of ice you're climbing, but when we want to get rests and get our feet flat, you're going to be using these bottom points, and if they're not very sharp too, you can feel them not sticking in and not feeling as secure. So I do try to sharpen the bottom ones too, and you'll notice this one, which I've already done, so I won't have to do as much. It's a little harder. You have to keep, because of the angle you're going to try to get on the points, you're going to have to find creative ways to hold these. Some people will use a vise. I just like using my legs because I can move it around a little more often. Same with the front point. At some point, these front points too need to be replaced. After you file them back again, I kind of use that first tooth rule. When I start losing that first tooth, then for me it's time to replace those. So get those front ones, get the secondary ones. I'll work both sides of it. The problem with sharpening these bottom points is, as you can see, eventually they're going to get shorter and shorter and shorter, and you will no longer be, you cannot replace them. You just have to replace the crampon. So how much you want to sharpen those is a little bit up to you. For me, it's primarily the front and the second two, but I will work on these ones here as well for the flat footing into the ice. So again, Try to mimic the angles they came with, filing in one direction, bringing it nice and sharp. If you need to, you can detune the front just a touch, and avoid back and forth rubbing with the file. Oh, and this is going to make a big mess of metal filings, little shavings. So I'm out here in my garage. Do it somewhere where you're not going to make a mess, on carpet, or maybe even on a place that you're going to have to walk across from time to time. And that's it. Hope you found that helpful, and let me know if you want some more tips on that. I'm happy to give you more.